So, Jeffrey Epstein associate and PR guru, sloppy Steve Bannon, is going to be a featured speaker at CPAC. Now, CPAC is one of the largest conservative political action committee organization, money laundering operation in conservative politics. I'd say just below or maybe equal to Turning Point USA. Now, I've never been to a CPAC event. I look at these events as Disney for conservative retards. By the way, retard is only a slur and you're offended by it if you truly think mentally challenged people are retards. And in that case, well, you should take a look at yourself for thinking that way. Anyway, figured I'd add that in. Matt Schlapp and his wife, Mercedes Schlapp, who worked in the first Trump administration, they own CPAC. And it's nothing but a tremendous political money laundering operation that they use to fund bad ideas and usually bad candidates. A lot of never Trumpers, a lot of anti-MAGA, a lot of just fake bullshitters who pose as MAGA supporters. You know, on MAGA, what's happening right now, what you're seeing on social media and other places, is not a divide of MAGA. MAGA is not dividing. MAGA is very strong. What's happening now is a purge. Real MAGA is exposing those who claimed they were MAGA, but are truly grifting pieces of garbage and have only used the MAGA movement, only used President Trump's name to enrich themselves, to monetize on social media, to gain a following on social media in order to monetize, get deals from businesses that are in line with MAGA and support President Trump. But then when they don't get what they want, or when they talk out of line and try to talk for the president or put words in his mouth, they get pushed out and they get really bitter about it. And then the truth comes out, who they really are and what they were really about. Matt Schlapp from CPAC, he's been involved in some weird controversies in the past. Basically, he's a closet homosexual who's made advances at younger staffers on numerous occasions, one of which actually sued him, but dropped the lawsuit and then apologized after he was paid almost $500,000 out of some obscure insurance policy. The Schlapps paid him off. Other instances where he made inappropriate gestures and even touched, men half his age. It's really sickening. And I'll tell you what, there's a lot of closet homosexuals who claim they're conservatives. That's a real thing. It's really creepy. Whatever. So CPAC has just turned into this grimy organization. I think it's always been a grimy organization. Not all about money. That's all they care about is money, donate, one-time donation, monthly donation, sponsor. I've been approached by them all and their proxy organizations to have my business sponsor events. I'm so glad I never got involved with these people, and I've had so many opportunities, even with sloppy Steve Bannon. I'll get into that. So CPAC decides after all of this information comes out about sloppy Steve Bannon's longtime relationship with Jeffrey Epstein in the emails, in the text messages, the files, that they should have him come and speak at CPAC, him and his lapdog, Jack Posobiec. Now, people are really pushing back against that. saying, listen, CPAC is now a dead organization. Some people are comparing it to the new Clinton Foundation. You could believe that. And then, of course, you'll still have your war room Bannonite parasites that will defend him to their demise. The fact of the matter is, sloppy Steve Bannon is a rat. He's a government rat. He lied under oath about Roger Stone, who's a great friend of mine, that ended up getting Roger Stone convicted of lying to Congress about the Russia hoax, who was eventually pardoned by President Trump. Now, I will say this. My loyalty lies with President Trump. I've got to spend time with him. I've got to work with the team during the campaign. Met him several times. Great man, great family. I'll always cherish that time that I was able to do that and see behind the curtain and got to witness history as it was being made during the 2024 presidential campaign. Steve Bannon, which had no part of, by the way, but the war room Bannonite parasites will tell you different. Steve Bannon has not had direct access to President Trump since 2017 when President Trump threw him out of the White House, tossed him on his ass for leaking false information to the press. He was told to stop. He didn't stop, and he was shown the door. There's a reason President Trump never appeared on the war room. President Trump did a live airing, or I should say, it was at Bedminster with Steve Bannon, and Donald Trump walked in a room after a movie screening, and Bannon had a studio set up to promote the movie. It was about human trafficking, and they had the producer there. I was at the movie screening. I was actually in the room. President Trump wasn't too happy that he had to sit down with Steve Bannon and go on air with him, but he did it. President Trump is very hold the MAGA coalition, or what he sees as the MAGA coalition, together. He knows people have their differences. He doesn't care about that. He cares about the mission, and that's a true leader. Steve Bannon obviously had an axe to grind with President Trump back in 2017 when he got fired, so he decided to seek out Jeffrey Epstein, knew that Jeffrey Epstein had an axe to grind with President Trump. This wasn't about making a documentary to expose Jeffrey Epstein. Steve Bannon needed a payday. He was originally a Wall Street guy. Jeffrey Epstein was a Wall Street guy. They got together. They bonded. Two scorned men that at that time hated President Trump. And make no mistake, Steve Bannon, in the pit of his soul, to this day, hates Donald Trump. He is the biggest con man, doom salesman, black pill dispensing scumbag in American politics today. I'm not the only one that'll tell you that. And there's plenty of receipts to back it up. In these emails and text messages, Steve Bannon to Epstein admitted of tanking a China trade deal in the first Trump administration because Bannon is tied to a lot of dirty CCP money. He called Jeffrey Epstein God. He was making plans to go film at the island. Now, I've said this before. I'm not accusing Steve Bannon of doing anything inappropriate with underage girls or anything like that. This is more of Steve Bannon finding a way to serve himself. And if that meant undermining a Trump presidency alongside of Jeffrey Epstein, that's what it was going to be. And that was the plan. Go and read. I'm not going to sit here and go through the text messages. Go and read them. They're everywhere. The text messages, the emails, you read them. You can judge for yourself. I'm just telling you personal experience that I've seen with my own eyes, my own ears, talking to people also that have direct knowledge of what's going on. So sloppy Steve Bannon's going to go speak at CPAC and influence everybody. And at the same time, his whole plan was to undermine a sitting president of the United States. Thrown out of the White House in 2017, he hooked up with Epstein, was texting him hours before Epstein was arrested and then got the message from Epstein's phone, everything is canceled because he got arrested. Bannon was looking to travel to the island to film there, asked about it. They were planning it. Bannon's people, or Bannon himself, was in contact with Epstein's people. Like it was happening. Imagine if Jeffrey Epstein wasn't arrested. How would it have gone with those two? They were doing some really deep, dark stuff behind the scenes. They were trying to make their deep state contacts in government get to someone in the DOJ so that they can find a way. This is the first Trump presidency. Find a way to do away with the clause that exempts sitting presidents from any type of criminal prosecution. That if they were able, with deep state ties, to get rid of that, they were going to find a way to attempt to destroy Donald Trump in his first presidency, personally, politically, criminally, any way they could. Jeffrey Epstein hated Donald Trump for exposing him for the sick sex trafficking pedophile that he is. And Steve Bannon was pissed off at President Trump for firing him, calling him sloppy Steve Bannon in public, making a mockery of him, and pushing him out of Trump world. Bannon only has access through his proxies that he knows in the Trump administration or who are around President Trump regularly. That phone call Steve Bannon took on his show when he had Carrie Lake on as a guest, that the president was calling him during his show, that was a lie. That was not a phone call from the president. First of all, there's two things that you don't do. You don't tell the president you're going to call you back because you're live on your show. And second, lie because it's always going to come back to you. And it was proven it was a lie. The president didn't call him. President Trump doesn't care what goes on in these little battles. President Trump cares about America, America first, the agenda, keeping America strong, making America safe and prosper. He doesn't care about all the little bickering. But he does know it's important for other people who are not trying to govern and save the free world from annihilation from terrorists to point out and expose these people, because the trash will take itself out eventually. So all this coming out at Steve Bannon, and people are still defending him. It's in black and white. It's there. It's all verified. It's not made up. It's true. Jack Posobiec will not acknowledge it when he's asked about it on social media. He blocks people. He's the main lapdog. Steve Bannon, listen, it's a whole operation. Steve Bannon, after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, got his minions together and said, we have to take over Turning Point USA. How do they do it? Well, they insert Jack Posobiec in with the people basically making the decisions. Because Erica Kirk, who's the CEO, they have a board. She's not really making decisions. She doesn't know how to run Turning Point USA. So my prediction is they'll either get her to fall in line, or there'll be some sort of scandal like what Candace Owens is trying to cook up. And remember, Candace Owens is very close with Steve Bannon. Very close with Steve Bannon. So make no mistake that this little documentary, this docuseries, investigative bullshit that Candace Owens is bringing out about Erica Kirk isn't concocted from the war room. Which, by the way, the war room, also in the messages with Jeffrey Epstein told Steve Bannon that he should start a media company. And then shortly after he did, he started the war room covering the impeachments of President Trump and war room pandemic and what is now is war room. It wouldn't surprise me if Jeffrey Epstein had a lot of input in the infrastructure and maybe financing of it, and even said in other emails and text messages that it's an avenue to get good sources, control information, things of that nature. They were going to use War Room if Jeffrey Epstein did not go to jail and ultimately not hang himself. I don't know if I could say that. Whatever. Then I believe, and other people have said this, they would have used the War Room as a vessel for some hardcore counter messaging of President Trump and go after him. If there was enough money behind it, Steve Bannon will do anything. He will do anything for money. He owns Jack Posobiec. He owns Raheem Kassam. Raheem Kassam could not launch the National Pulse without Bannon's money. And that's a fact. Raheem Kassam hates when I talk about that. He blocked me. He doesn't like the fact that he was on a phone call with me. He was on a phone call with me a couple years ago because we were talking about another business venture as the National Pulse was launching. And he said, I wish I didn't have to take Bannon's money, but I can't relaunch the National Pulse without it. Hopefully, this is Raheem Kassam saying this to me on the phone. He says, hopefully, Steve Bannon unalives in prison so that I can take over War Room. That's from Raheem Kassam. Because Raheem Kassam was screwed over years ago from the War Room. He's the only one in War Room that didn't become a millionaire. So he was scorned, but he needed the money. So what did he do? He had to give up equity. That's how Bannon operates. That's how he tried to do it with me with my business. He wanted ownership equity in my business. Before that, when I first launched my cigar company, he had somebody, a mutual acquaintance who was involved in the War Room, come to me and say, hey, this was before Steve Bannon went to prison. He said, hey, Steve Bannon is going to end up going to prison for his defiance of the congressional subpoena, which I'll touch on in a second. Because Steve Bannon didn't go to prison to defend President Trump. He didn't go to prison for President Trump, okay? It's because I know somebody, as soon as I said, Steve Bannon went to prison for Donald Trump. No, he didn't, moron. Anyway, they were going to launch this offshoot of War Room with a younger crowd to try to suck in the younger generation into politics. Because let's face it, the War Room's audience is like 95% boomers. Nothing against boomers. It's just the fact. So then they said, so why don't you, this is right when I was launching my cigar company. Why don't you become a sponsor of this offshoot show? And then Steve Bannon will also mention it on War Room. Sounds good, right? I mean, they have a huge audience. This was back 2022-ish. And I thought about it. I was like, oh, get back to me with some numbers. 30 seconds, the text message was about $20,000 a month. And I'm like, well, first of all, it wasn't even officially launched yet. I was in like 2 weeks of being launched. And I'm like, yeah, it's a new company. I'm not looking to do $20,000 in marketing for one avenue of marketing. So I deaded that because I also spoke to someone else at the War Room, one of the producers or staffers, and they told me, they said, Alan, War Room isn't worth $2,000 a month. It's all a scam. Don't do it. They all prop themselves up like they're this god of media, and they're not. So that went away. So during the campaign, War Room attempted again, and they had one of their attorneys, was heavily involved in politics, come to me and talk about this deal about having the cigars come and be a sponsor for War Room. And they said, but listen, we don't want money up front. They wanted an equity. Steve Bannon wanted an equity ownership share of my cigar company, Patriot Cigar Company. The contract was a joke. They basically had it that in 5 years' time, they would own 55%, majority stakeholder in my cigar company. Steve Bannon would own more than half of it. I'm like, yeah, this isn't going to work. And, they had all the breakdowns and everything. It was like, I don't know, an 8-page contract. And they were so pushy. They wanted me to sign it. It was right before Bannon was going to jail. And anyway, I declined because I saw what it was. And then I did some digging and realized he does that with everything he's involved in. He has to have an equity stake ownership. Hey, it's a great business tactic. If you can make it happen, it's great. It wasn't the deal for me. It just goes to show all he cares about is money and control. I believe he has money invested in CPAC. I know he has money invested in Turning Point. He was close with Charlie Kirk. So, whatever. Neither here nor there. CPAC is having trouble selling there. I hear they're selling tickets for like $900. But now I was told by 3 people this week, I think CPAC is March 25th to like the 28th, that they are 3 people that I know were approached from CPAC and said, we'll give you free VIP tickets, hotel lodging, travel costs. There was some other bonus too, if you just come. Like begging people to come. I don't know if they're going to show up to an empty room. I don't know if they're going to show up to a lot of detractors. It's going to be interesting to see how people handle this whole Steve Bannon thing, because it is becoming and still is a big issue of sloppy Steve Bannon, known now as an associate of Jeffrey Epstein, and all the information there about what their plans were to undermine a Trump presidency. Now, I'll say this. Well, let's talk about quick Steve Bannon going to jail to defend Donald Trump and MAGA, which is all complete horse shit. So many people got those congressional subpoenas, and he saw an opportunity to be a martyr and say, well, I'm not going to go to a congressional hearing. I'm not going to do it. Let's see if they hold me in contempt and eventually put me in jail, because he knew they were only going to put him in jail for under 6 months. I think he went to jail for 4 months. He went to federal prison. And what did he do? He fundraised off it. It was all clout. It was all leading up to surrendering into federal prison. Steve Bannon, the defender of MAGA, the defender of President Trump. He knew he could grift off of it. He needed a grift. He always needs a grift, whether it's selling gold, going to prison for a few months. I mean, the guy didn't have any hard time in prison. Basically, he was protected. And he knew this was going to happen. So he used that. I'll tell you one thing that I was disappointed. I've been calling Steve Bannon out as a con man since 2016. I was upset when President Trump pardoned him. I was upset that President Trump pardoned Steve Bannon for the build the wall scam. Yeah, we build the wall. Because I knew what he was doing. A lot of people knew what he was doing. He wasn't raising money to build a wall. He was raising money to line his pockets, and he thought he could get away with it. Well, Steve Bannon did get away with it. Almost. And at that time, when it happened, before it went to trial, before anything could really happen, President Trump pardoned him. Because again, President Trump's, in my opinion, and what I've seen is, hold the coalition together that is pushing out the messaging that is needed. Although they're not doing that so much anymore over at the War Room. So President Trump pardons Steve Bannon. That federal case, the Build the Wall case, it was around, I think, August of 2020. So I actually have a little some notes here on it. Here it is. So President Trump pardoned Steve Bannon, but there were 3 co-defendants that weren't lucky enough to get pardons. And they went on trial for the We Build the Wall scam in the Southern District of New York. There's this guy, Brian Colfage. He was the founder and president of We Build the Wall. Well, he apparently was the primary beneficiary of diverted funds, basically the money launderer. He pleaded guilty in April of 2022 to conspiracy to commit wire fraud and related tax offenses. He was sentenced in 2023 to 4 years and 3 months in prison, followed by 3 years supervised release. And he was ordered to forfeit over $17.8 million and pay over $2 million in restitution. Another one of Steve Bannon's co-defendants in the We Build the Wall scam was Andrew Badalato. He was the financier involved in the scheme, and he pleaded guilty in April of 2022, conspiracy to commit wire fraud. He was sentenced April 26, 2023, to 3 years in prison and 3 years supervised release. He was also ordered to forfeit millions of dollars and pay the same amount of restitution, the $2 million. And then the last co-defendant, co-conspirator with Steve Bannon in the We Build the Wall scam was Timothy Shea. He was the guy who was routing the funds. He was convicted at trial, the only one of the 4 to go to trial. The others pleaded guilty. Timothy Shea says, no, I'm not guilty. We're going to go to trial. Well, he was sentenced July of 2023 to 5.25 years in prison, the longest sentence in that federal case. Again, Sloppy Steve Bannon was pardoned federally by President Trump before any trial or sentencing in that case. So he had no federal conviction in the case. But New York State was like, well, Sloppy Steve, we're going to charge you criminally in a state case. It's the only standalone New York criminal prosecution against Steve Bannon in the We Build the Wall scam. It was brought to New York Supreme Court, and eventually, in February of 2025, so a little over a year ago, Steve Bannon pled guilty in Manhattan Supreme Court to 1 count of scheme to defraud in the first degree. It's a Class E felony, and in exchange, prosecutors dropped the remaining counts, which was 2 counts of money laundering in the second degree, 2 counts of conspiracy in the 4th degree, and 1 count of conspiracy in the 5th degree. Steve Bannon's life was saved by President Trump, and Steve Bannon isn't thankful for it. Steve Bannon still works behind the scenes to undermine the Trump administration to this day, March 2026. He waived his right to appeal, and he was sentenced to 3 years of conditional discharge, so no jail time, no probation, or any kind of type of supervision beyond the conditions of his conditional discharge. He basically just has to be good for 3 years, and it goes away. He was barred from serving as an officer or director of any charity or not-for-profit organization in New York State, or raising funds for such entities with assets in New York. And he waived his right to appeal. So again, if he wasn't pardoned, because that We Build the Wall scam that they were pulling was a complete scam. It absolutely was. And Steve Bannon was rooted in it, just like he's rooted in every scam that's out there in politics. Usually, War Room with Steve Bannon, directly or indirectly, is involved. This is a guy who was fired, thrown out of the White House. As a matter of fact, Sorry about that bright light. I want to share this. Steve Bannon was also involved in the books that Michael Wolff wrote against President Trump. And this was when Twitter was Twitter, back during the first administration. Michael Wolff is a total loser who made up stories in order to sell his really boring and untruthful book. He used sloppy Steve Bannon, who cried when he got fired and begged for his job. Now, sloppy Steve has been dumped like a dog by almost everyone. Too bad. See, if you know how President Trump operates, then you know he only needs to tell the public what he thinks of somebody once. That doesn't go away. And yes, because someone's going to say this too, but he just posted a photo on Truth Social not too long ago of Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro at Mar-a-Lago and saying these are two good guys. Well, you have to have, I guess, an IQ over 70 to interpret what that meant. So Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro both defied the congressional subpoenas and both went to jail for it. Peter Navarro and Steve Bannon could have walked in and said, I plead the fifth to every single question, walked out and never saw a day in jail. But they didn't. They both had agendas. So what did that post mean? Well, that post meant that the Democrats at the time weaponized the government against anyone they could who was a Republican, conservative, was in Trump world. So yeah, Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro should have never been held in contempt of Congress. They should have never been charged because it was all based on nonsense. That doesn't negate the fact that Steve Bannon went to jail on purpose to grift and make himself a martyr to his base, to give him more money and to support his sponsors while he's going to jail for the cause. It's all bullshit. So yeah, in the case of being prosecuted by a weaponized DOJ under the Biden administration, yeah, they're both good guys. And now look, they're doing good. Steve Bannon has never been invited, off record or on the record, to the White House and stood in the Oval Office with President Trump since he was thrown out of the White House on his ass in 2017. People don't like to use their heads and do critical thinking. People just still will spew bullshit and say, Steve Bannon invented MAGA. No, he didn't. It's Donald Trump's movement. Steve Bannon had no part in any of President Trump's victories in 2016 and this time around. And President Trump has openly said that about the first Trump presidency, and Steve Bannon did nothing for the campaign the second time around. Nothing. There's no access. This is the true Steve Bannon. He was manipulated and controlled by Jeffrey Epstein. Steve Bannon wasn't manipulating and controlling Jeffrey Epstein. It was the other way around. Because Jeffrey Epstein had a lot more money than Steve Bannon, and Steve Bannon wanted a piece. And they both had the same goal. Seek revenge on Donald Trump. Now, many of you, you don't have to believe this. I mean, obviously. This is America. You can hate me. You can hate comment. You can agree with me. This is the truth, though. Steve Bannon is a government rat. Steve Bannon is a scam artist. Steve Bannon will cut the throat of anybody if it means making a dollar for himself. But, featured speaker, March 25th to the 28th, sloppy Steve Bannon, Jeffrey Epstein's publicist, PR guru, Steve Bannon went to work for a guy who was already convicted as a sexual predator, a sex trafficker, to go and polish his image. There are 16 hours of tape between the two of them that I don't believe will ever see the light of day. You saw about an hour and 20 minutes of it, of different clips of interviews in the Epstein files. Now, but this has all come out, his proxies, especially Raheem Kassam over at the National Pulse, who, by the way, isn't even an American citizen, went with this narrative that, oh, there's going to be a documentary coming out. And it's all going to come out that Steve Bannon was this super secret agent that was going in to infiltrate Jeffrey Epstein to expose him to what he really was. And that he was just friendly with him to gain his trust. So this is what I believe is going to happen now. I believe they're going to take whatever they possibly can use in any of this recorded footage that has not seen the light of day. They're going to speed edit and cut and do whatever they can to make this fabricated masterpiece to try to make Steve Bannon look like a hero for his base that's going, see, Steve Bannon is great. Steve Bannon is MAGA. Steve Bannon stands with President Trump. And it's all bullshit. It's all bullshit. And it wouldn't surprise me if they're going to have interviews of like Jack Posobiec in it, Raheem Kassam, all the war room Bannonite parasites are going to get together. Natalie Winters in a low-cut shirt. They're all going to get together. They're going to promote the hell out of it. And then basically what they're going to do is, I believe, if a documentary comes out, that it's going to be a PR fluff piece to now polish Steve Bannon's image, which he was trying to do to Jeffrey Epstein, to show that Steve Bannon was right. Don't fall for it. CPAC, if you're supporting CPAC monetarily, if you're going to spend money to go to CPAC, you are a moron. But I will say this. If you're going to take that plunge and go to CPAC, I put this out on social media. I will pay $1,000 to any one individual who gets a 30-second or more video confronting Bannon at CPAC about his longtime relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. The video must be clear, visually, audibly, and it must be an original video from the individual sent to me, not posted. You have to send it to me first, and I will personally pay you $1,000. And if you do the same thing to Jack Posobiec at CPAC, because he'll be there too, defending his master's honor, Steve Bannon, I'll throw in another $500. Same rules. If you go to CPAC, you have an opportunity to make $1,500 and get me 2 video clips of Bannon and Jack Posobiec as you confront them and ask them, what's the deal with your relationship with longtime sex trafficker, convicted sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein? And Jack Posobiec, why aren't you reporting on this since you're this big time journalist doing all of this journalisming? Why aren't you disavowing Steve Bannon? That's a rhetorical question because they're in business together. There's a lot of money floating around. Listen, take the information I gave you for whatever it's worth. And I didn't even give you all the information. Steve Bannon is toxic to MAGA. Steve Bannon is toxic to the Trump administration. Steve Bannon is toxic to conservatism. And people who are now still appearing on his show, it's not a good look. CPAC, it's not a good look. And I'm going to end with this. I really want to see what Turning Point USA is going to do. Steve Bannon wants to take over Turning Point USA by inserting Jack Posobiec and how involved he is with Turning Point USA right now. Jack Posobiec is a wannabe Charlie Kirk. Jack Posobiec actually thinks he could be the next Charlie Kirk. If the movement is going to allow that to happen, then the movement is dead. Turning Point USA isn't the organization they once was. I think Erica Kirk is vulnerable. I think Erica Kirk is either going to be manipulated out of the organization, is going to be bought out of the organization, or there's going to be a scandal that they're going to fabricate that's going to be so intense that there's no coming back from it. And I believe Steve Bannon and the Bannonite parasites will be behind it. Because if they could take over Turning Point USA, they can manipulate elections with a lot of money. A lot of money. If Steve Bannon gets control of that vessel known as Turning Point USA, that is not a good look for MAGA. The War Room posse has been fooled. The War Room Bannonite parasites are eating away the MAGA movement. It will not be what President Trump started, envisioned, and continues after President Trump is out of politics. Bannon wants to just completely change it, and he'll do anything to do it. So I have a lot of reservations about Turning Point USA right now because of what's going on, mostly on the inside with Jack Posobiec, and he's Steve Bannon's lapdog. And now, CPAC, they're lining themselves up. They have it in their head that when President Trump is out of office, they can have enough contacts and influence and money to come in and do what's needed to construct, and this is going to sound crazy, but I've heard this in conversations, to construct an administration that they have influence over. Make no mistake, if you're a J.D. Vance fan or a Marco Rubio fan of a Vance Rubio ticket or whatever the case may be with those two individuals, Jack Posobiec and Steve Bannon, they don't want either one of them in the White House in 2028. That's fact. That's a guarantee. And I think the big move is on Turning Point USA so that they can destroy whatever support Erica Kirk has already confirmed and pledged for a J.D. Vance presidency in 2028. There's a lot of dark stuff going on in the background of conservative politics. And it's disheartening. And I'm going to say this. When President Trump is not in an elected position anymore, when his term is up, it's going to be mayhem. He will be behind the scenes. I'm sure he'll be making his endorsements and fundraisers and things like that. He's 80 years old. There's going to be like this power vacuum. Who's going to be the real leader of the party? Who's going to be the influence in the party? What's going to happen there? And that's going to be quite interesting to see. People aren't really thinking about that. In any case, listen, come and check out the podcast, Steak for Breakfast podcast. We're on Spotify, Apple, anywhere you get your podcasts. Ronan and myself, Tuesdays and Fridays, we release episodes. We have Republican members of Congress. We have Trump administration members, former Trump administration members come on the show. We give you real commentary on real news. There's no bullshit. There's no fluff. We have a lot of fun. You get a little off kilter sometimes. We change the way people consume their news. We're fast growing. Again, Spotify, Apple, all the podcast platforms, Steak for Breakfast. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, Steak Tidbits, with me, Alan Jacoby, co-host of the Steak for Breakfast podcast. And I'll see you soon.